Millions of Americans enjoy a cold beer every week without giving a second thought to what is actually inside the bottle. Most people assume beer is made from a handful of simple ingredients like water, barley, hops, and yeast. But for many of today's biggest brands, the reality is far more complicated. Over the years, large commercial breweries have quietly introduced genetically modified ingredients, highly processed brewing aids, synthetic additives, and agricultural chemicals that most consumers never expect to find in a glass of beer. Because alcohol manufacturers are not required to disclose complete ingredient lists the way food companies are, millions of people have no idea what they are really drinking. Today, Tips for Seniors is pulling back the curtain. We are counting down 8 popular beer brands that have raised concerns because of genetically modified ingredients, herbicide contamination, synthetic processing agents, and other controversial additives that continue to spark debate among consumers and researchers alike. Some of the names on this list may surprise you. In fact, one of your favorite beers might be among them. But before you decide to give up beer altogether, there is some good news. Stay with us until the very end because we will also reveal 4 beer brands that many brewing experts respect for doing things the traditional way. These breweries rely on simple ingredients, time-honored brewing methods, and far fewer compromises, proving that good beer does not have to come with a long list of unnecessary extras. Whether you enjoy an occasional beer with dinner or like sharing one with friends on the weekend, this information could completely change what ends up in your shopping cart the next time you visit the liquor store. Let us separate real beer from chemical cocktails. Number 8. Michelob Ultra. Michelob Ultra has spent years building an image as the beer for active, health-conscious adults. Its advertising focuses on fitness, golf courses, cycling, running, and people who want to enjoy a drink without consuming too many calories. For many consumers, it feels like the responsible choice compared with traditional beer. And on the surface, that sounds convincing. With only 95 calories per serving, Michelob Ultra appears to offer a lighter alternative for anyone watching their weight. But calories tell only a small part of the story. What the advertisements rarely mention is that the alcohol base is produced using genetically modified corn. The brewing process also relies on corn syrup and dextrose derived from genetically modified corn, ingredients that many traditional brewers would never consider using because they believe beer should begin with high-quality malted barley rather than inexpensive processed sugars. Another ingredient that often goes unnoticed is propylene glycol alginate. This synthetic thickening and stabilizing agent helps maintain a consistent foam and texture from one batch to another. Although the United States Food and Drug Administration classifies it as safe for food use, many traditional European brewers choose not to use ingredients like this because they believe beer should achieve its texture naturally through the brewing process instead of relying on chemical additives. Michelob Ultra also uses hop extract instead of relying entirely on whole hops. While hop extracts help manufacturers create a consistent flavor profile on a massive commercial scale, many brewing experts argue that they cannot fully replace the natural oils and plant compounds found in real hops. Those naturally occurring compounds are responsible for much of the aroma, flavor, and character that beer lovers appreciate. Has also detected glyphosate residue in Michelob Ultra. Glyphosate is the controversial herbicide widely sprayed on genetically modified crops throughout modern agriculture. Although regulators continue to debate acceptable exposure levels, many consumers would likely prefer not to consume any pesticide residue if given the choice. What makes this situation especially concerning is the way Michelob Ultra is marketed. Many people drink it after a workout or while trying to maintain a healthier lifestyle because they believe they are making a smarter decision than choosing heavier beers. Yet at the same time, they may also be consuming traces of herbicides together with several highly processed ingredients that receive little attention in advertising. The extensive filtration process creates another trade-off. While it produces the crisp, clean taste that Michelob Ultra is known for, it also removes many of the naturally occurring compounds found in traditionally brewed beer. Critics argue that after all of this processing, The finished product resembles little more than highly filtered alcoholic water, with carefully engineered flavor and texture added back during manufacturing. Michelob Ultra may still be one of the most recognizable light beers in America, but when you look beyond the calorie count and marketing slogans, the ingredient list raises far more questions than many consumers ever realize. Number 7. Stella Artois. Stella Artois has built its reputation on elegance, tradition, and premium quality. Its advertising proudly highlights more than 6 centuries of Belgian brewing heritage, encouraging consumers to believe they are choosing one of the finest beers available. The sophisticated branding, distinctive chalice, and higher price point all reinforce the image of craftsmanship and authenticity. However, the reality behind the label is not quite as simple. Independent laboratory testing conducted in 2023 detected measurable levels of glyphosate residue in Stella Artois. The contamination is believed to originate from barley, exposed to herbicides during agricultural production. While the detected levels fall within existing regulatory limits, the discovery has fueled continuing concerns among consumers who would rather avoid unnecessary pesticide exposure whenever possible. Another issue is the use of genetically modified corn and rice as brewing adjuncts. Instead of relying almost entirely on malted barley, Stella incorporates these less expensive grains to help reduce production costs, while maintaining a consistent flavor profile across millions of barrels produced each year. Critics argue that this approach moves the beer further away from traditional Belgian brewing methods that originally built the brand reputation. The beer also contains Class 4 caramel coloring to maintain its familiar appearance from one production batch to the next. During the manufacturing process, this coloring can produce 4-methylimidazole, a chemical that has attracted attention after laboratory studies linked high exposure levels to cancer in experimental animals. California requires warning labels on products containing significant amounts of this compound, yet many consumers never realize it may also be present in certain beers. Stella Artois also uses isinglass during the clarification process. Isinglass is a fining agent derived from fish bladder that helps remove suspended particles, leaving the beer bright and clear before packaging. Although very little remains in the finished product, many consumers with fish allergies, religious dietary restrictions, or vegetarian lifestyles are completely unaware that fish-derived ingredients may have been used during production because brewers generally are not required to disclose every involved during fermentation. While most of the sugar is converted into alcohol, critics point out that its use reflects an industrial brewing approach focused on efficiency and cost reduction rather than traditional ingredient quality. Consumers who purchase Stella Artois in aluminum cans should also be aware of another potential concern. Many beverage cans are lined with bisphenol A, commonly known as BPA, a chemical that can migrate into beverages, particularly when cans are stored in warm environments or remain on shelves for extended periods. BPA has been studied extensively because of its possible effects on hormone regulation, making it another consideration for health-conscious drinkers. Taken individually, none of these issues may seem dramatic on their own. But when herbicide residue, genetically modified grains, caramel coloring, fish-derived processing agents, corn syrup, and possible BPA exposure are all considered together, the image of Stella Artois as a pure and traditional premium beer becomes much more difficult to accept. For a brand that has spent decades promoting sophistication, heritage, and exceptional brewing standards, the ingredient profile tells a story that many loyal customers may never have expected to hear. Number 6. Corona Extra. Corona Extra has spent decades building an image of sunshine, beaches, and carefree vacations. Its clear bottle, signature lime wedge, and relaxed lifestyle marketing have turned it into one of the most recognizable imported beers in the world. To many consumers, opening a bottle of Corona feels like bringing a little piece of the beach home. But behind that refreshing image are several ingredients and production methods that deserve a closer look. One of the first concerns is the use of propylene glycol as a stabilizer. This synthetic compound helps the beer maintain a consistent texture and quality while traveling long distances from Mexico to markets around the world. Although approved for food use, Many traditional brewers argue that beer should not require synthetic stabilizers when it is brewed with high-quality ingredients and proper techniques. Corona Extra also relies on genetically modified corn syrup as a source of fermentable sugars. Traditional brewing typically depends on malted barley to provide these sugars naturally. Using corn syrup allows manufacturers to lower production costs and maintain consistency on a massive commercial scale, but critics argue that it sacrifices authenticity in the process. Independent laboratory testing has also detected concerning levels of glyphosate residue in Corona Extra. Among many of the popular beers tested, Corona ranked near the top for herbicide contamination. While regulatory agencies continue to maintain that the detected levels fall within legal limits, many consumers question whether repeated exposure over many years is truly something they want to accept. The famous clear bottle creates another problem that many people never consider. Unlike brown bottles that help protect beer from sunlight, clear glass allows ultraviolet light to penetrate much more easily. This exposure can trigger chemical reactions that rapidly degrade the hops, creating unpleasant flavors often described as skunky or stale. To help compensate for this weakness, manufacturers rely on additional stabilizers and preservatives to extend shelf life and maintain product consistency. One of these additives is tetrasodium pyrophosphate, a synthetic compound used to prevent discoloration and preserve appearance throughout storage and transportation. Critics argue that it is another unnecessary chemical that would never appear in contain small amounts of high-fructose corn syrup to help restore sweetness and flavor that can be lost during large-scale production and extended storage. While the amount may be relatively small, it represents yet another processed ingredient added to a beer that many consumers assume is made using only traditional brewing materials. Modified food starch derived from corn is also used to improve foam stability and head retention. Once again, this helps create a more consistent appearance in every bottle, but it is another example of industrial processing replacing traditional brewing craftsmanship. Nutritionally, Corona Extra contains approximately 148 calories and 14 grams of carbohydrates per bottle. Much of those carbohydrates come from processed corn-derived sugars rather than naturally malted grains, making the nutritional profile less appealing than many consumers might expect from a premium imported beer. Some beer historians have even pointed out that the now famous lime wedge tradition may have become popular because it helped mask flavor changes caused by light exposure in the clear bottle. Whether or not that was the original reason, the practice eventually became one of the brand's most recognizable marketing symbols. When you combine genetically modified ingredients, herbicide residue, synthetic stabilizers, preservatives, modified food starch, and packaging that actually increases the risk of flavor deterioration, Corona Extra begins to look much less like a simple beach beer and much more like a highly engineered industrial product. The tropical image may still be appealing, but the ingredient list tells a very different story once you look beyond the marketing. Number 5. Bud Light. As the best-selling beer in the United States for many years, Bud Light has become a household name. Millions of Americans reach for it at backyard cookouts, sporting events, family gatherings, and weekend parties without ever questioning what goes into every can. Its advertising has always focused on being light, refreshing, and easy to drink, but when you look beyond the commercials, the ingredient profile becomes far less reassuring. Bud Light is brewed using genetically modified rice and corn, with rice serving as one of its primary grains instead of relying mainly on traditional malted barley. This allows the beer to maintain its light body while keeping production costs low across the enormous volumes brewed every year. The brewing process also includes corn syrup during fermentation. Although the company has repeatedly stated that most of the corn syrup is converted into alcohol before packaging, critics point out that the use of genetically modified corn derivatives remains part of the manufacturing process and reflects the priorities of large-scale industrial brewing rather than traditional beer making. Bud Light also contains several synthetic stabilizers designed to improve consistency from one batch to another. One of these is propylene glycol alginate, a chemical additive that helps prevent separation while maintaining foam and texture. While regulators consider it safe for food use, many traditional brewers believe beer should achieve these qualities naturally through carefully selected ingredients and proper brewing techniques. Independent laboratory testing has also detected glyphosate residue in Bud Light. The contamination most likely originates from herbicides used on genetically modified corn and other agricultural crops involved in production. Although the detected levels remain within current regulatory standards, many health researchers continue to study the possible effects of repeated long-term exposure to low levels of pesticides. Is the use of hop extract instead of relying entirely on whole hops. Hop extracts help manufacturers create a highly consistent flavor profile while reducing costs, but they also eliminate many of the naturally occurring plant compounds that contribute to the aroma, complexity, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory properties associated with traditionally brewed beer. The beer also uses small amounts of high-fructose corn syrup to help balance flavor after much of the natural malt character has been removed through heavy processing. Critics argue that this approach produces a beverage that depends increasingly on engineered ingredients rather than authentic brewing craftsmanship. At approximately 110 calories per can, Bud Light appears to be a lighter option. However, nearly all of those calories come from alcohol and residual sugars, while providing virtually no meaningful nutritional value. There is also the packaging to consider. Many aluminum cans are lined with bisphenol A, commonly known as BPA. Research has shown that BPA can migrate into beverages over time, particularly when cans are exposed to heat or prolonged storage. Scientists continue to investigate the possible effects of BPA on hormone regulation, making it another issue that health-conscious consumers may wish to keep in mind. Perhaps the biggest concern surrounding Bud Light is simply how many people drink it. Because it remains one of the most widely consumed beers in America, millions of consumers may be exposed to these ingredients week after week without ever realizing what is inside the can. The extensive industrial processing removes much of what traditional beer naturally offers, then relies on synthetic ingredients to restore consistency, flavor, and stability. For critics of modern mass-production brewing, Bud Light represents a perfect example of how convenience and efficiency have gradually replaced the simplicity that beer was originally known for. Number 4. Coors Light. Coors Light has spent decades promoting itself as one of the purest beers in America. From its famous Rocky Mountain imagery to its claims of using fresh mountain spring water, the brand encourages consumers to associate every can with nature, purity, and simplicity. The cold-activated cans, silver packaging, and refreshing advertising all reinforce the idea that this is a clean, uncomplicated beer. But once you look past the marketing, the ingredient story becomes much more complicated. One of the primary fermentable ingredients used in Coors Light is genetically modified corn syrup. Rather than relying almost entirely on malted barley, the brewery uses corn-derived sugars to reduce production costs while maintaining the light taste consumers have come to expect. Traditional brewers argue that this approach sacrifices both flavor and authenticity in favor of efficiency. Another ingredient many consumers never realize is involved during production is isinglass. This fining agent, derived from fish bladder, is used during clarification to remove suspended particles and create a bright, clear appearance before packaging. Although very little remains in the finished beer, most consumers have no idea that animal-derived processing aids may have been used because manufacturers are generally not required to disclose them on the label. Coors Light also contains caramel coloring to ensure that every batch maintains the same familiar golden appearance. Specifically, Class 3 and Class 4 caramel colors may be used during production. During manufacturing, these colorings can generate compounds such as 4-methylimidazole, which has drawn scientific attention after laboratory studies linked high exposure levels to cancer in experimental animals. While the levels found in foods and beverages remain regulated, many health-conscious consumers prefer to avoid unnecessary exposure. Testing has also detected glyphosate residue in Coors Light. Researchers believe the contamination originates from both genetically modified corn and conventionally grown barley, exposed to herbicides during cultivation. Although the detected amounts remain within legal limits established by regulators, Critics argue that consumers are rarely informed that pesticide residues may be present in commercially produced beer. Instead of relying entirely on whole hops, Coors Light also incorporates hop extract oils during brewing. These concentrated extracts help maintain consistency across enormous production volumes while lowering costs. However, many brewing experts believe that hop extracts cannot fully replace the complex aroma, flavor, antioxidants, and naturally occurring plant compounds provided by whole hops. The brewing process also includes stabilizers such as alkaloid and carboxymethylcellulose. These synthetic additives help prevent cloudiness and improve product stability throughout transportation and storage. While effective from a manufacturing standpoint, they represent another departure from traditional brewing methods that depend on time, quality ingredients, and natural fermentation instead of chemical intervention. Each can contains approximately 102 calories and about 5 grams of carbohydrates. Much of those carbohydrates originate from corn-derived sugars rather than naturally malted barley, reinforcing the industrial nature of the brewing process. Another point that often raises questions is shelf life. Coors Light is designed to remain stable for as long as 6 months. Achieving that level of consistency across such a long storage period requires extensive processing and carefully controlled production methods that many craft brewers believe come at the expense of freshness and natural character. Consumer advocacy groups have also criticized Coors for not providing complete ingredient transparency. Because alcoholic beverages are subject to different labeling requirements than most packaged foods, the company is not obligated to disclose every ingredient or processing aid used during brewing. As a result, many customers assume they are drinking a simple beer made from just a few traditional ingredients when the production process is considerably more complex. When genetically modified ingredients, herbicide residues, synthetic stabilizers, hop extracts, caramel coloring, and limited ingredient transparency are all considered together, Coors Light begins to look far less like the pure Rocky Mountain beer portrayed in its advertisements. The mountain imagery may inspire confidence, but the brewing process tells a much different story once you examine what is actually inside the can. Number 3. Miller Lite. Miller Lite proudly claims its place in American brewing history as the beer that introduced the light beer category to millions of consumers. Since its launch in 1975, it has built a reputation around being lighter, smoother, and easier to drink than traditional beers. Generations of Americans have come to view Miller Lite as a dependable everyday beer that offers fewer calories without sacrificing taste. But behind that familiar image lies a brewing process that many critics believe relies heavily on industrial shortcuts. One of the biggest concerns is the heavy use of genetically modified corn and corn syrup during production. In fact, corn-based ingredients make up a significant portion of the fermentable sugars, while malted barley accounts for considerably less than many consumers would expect from a traditional beer recipe. This approach helps reduce manufacturing costs and creates the light body Miller Lite is known for, but many brewing purists argue that it comes at the expense of quality and authenticity. Rather than depending entirely on whole hops, Miller Lite uses hop extracts to create bitterness and maintain flavor consistency from one batch to the next. While this makes large-scale production easier, hop extracts cannot fully reproduce the complex oils, antioxidants, and naturally occurring plant compounds found in real hops that contribute to the character of traditionally brewed beer. The beer also contains propylene glycol alginate, a synthetic stabilizer used to help maintain foam and texture throughout storage and transportation. Although this additive is approved for food use, many traditional brewers believe that properly brewed beer should develop these qualities naturally without relying on chemical stabilizers. Independent laboratory testing has also detected measurable glyphosate residue in Miller Lite. The contamination is believed to originate from both genetically modified corn and herbicide-treated barley used during production. Among the mainstream beers tested, Miller Lite consistently ranked toward the higher end for pesticide residue, raising additional questions for consumers who prefer to limit unnecessary chemical exposure. The brewing process also relies on enzymes such as amyloglucosidase to break complex carbohydrates into fermentable sugars. This allows the brewery to create an exceptionally dry finish while reducing calorie content. Critics argue that this represents another example of industrial processing replacing traditional brewing skill with technological intervention. To maintain a uniform appearance, Miller Lite also contains caramel coloring. Certain types of caramel coloring can produce 4-methylimidazole during manufacturing, the same compound that has attracted scientific attention because of laboratory studies linking high exposure to cancer in experimental animals. While regulatory agencies continue to consider approved levels acceptable, many health-conscious consumers prefer to avoid products containing unnecessary artificial coloring whenever possible. Modified food starch derived from corn is another ingredient used to improve body and foam retention. Once again, this is not something typically found in traditionally brewed beer, where foam quality depends on malt proteins and careful brewing techniques rather than added stabilizers. Each can contains approximately 96 calories, making it one of the lower-calorie beers on the market. However, critics point out that those calories are achieved largely through dilution, extensive processing, enzyme treatment, and carefully engineered ingredient selection rather than through exceptional brewing craftsmanship. Like many other mass-produced beers, Miller Lite is commonly packaged in aluminum cans lined with bisphenol A, or BPA. Research has shown that BPA can migrate into beverages over time, particularly when cans are stored in warm conditions or for extended periods. Scientists continue to investigate the possible long-term effects of repeated exposure to this chemical, especially regarding hormone regulation. Perhaps the greatest concern is that Miller Lite is marketed as an everyday beer. Millions of Americans enjoy it regularly, often several times each week, meaning any exposure to pesticide residue, synthetic additives, and highly processed ingredients may accumulate gradually over many years. For many critics, Miller Lite represents everything that has changed about industrial brewing. Instead of prioritizing traditional ingredients, patient craftsmanship, and brewing heritage, the focus has shifted toward maximum efficiency, lower production costs, and highly standardized products designed to taste exactly the same every single time. The result is a beer that may be remarkably consistent, but one that many traditional brewers believe has sacrificed simplicity and ingredient quality along the way. Heineken has earned a reputation as one of the most recognizable premium imported beers in the world. Its iconic green bottle, global presence, and long brewing history have helped create the impression that every bottle represents European quality and traditional craftsmanship. For many consumers, choosing Heineken feels like stepping up from an ordinary domestic beer. But when you look beyond the familiar label, the brewing process reveals several concerns that are often overlooked. One of the first issues involves the use of genetically modified corn during fermentation. Instead of relying entirely on high-quality malted barley, Heineken incorporates corn to increase alcohol production while reducing production costs. Although this practice is common among large commercial breweries, many traditional brewers believe it compromises both the flavor and authenticity of the finished beer. Another point of concern is the yeast strain used during fermentation. According to some brewing analysts, the particular strain used by Heineken can produce relatively higher amounts of acetaldehyde compared with more traditional brewing yeasts. Acetaldehyde is a naturally occurring byproduct of fermentation and is widely recognized as one of the compounds associated with hangover symptoms. While every beer contains some acetaldehyde, critics argue that higher concentrations may contribute to a less desirable drinking experience. To maintain its signature golden amber appearance across breweries around the world, Heineken also uses Class 4 caramel coloring. During the manufacturing process, this coloring can produce 4-methylimidazole, the same compound that has attracted scientific attention because laboratory studies found links between high exposure levels and cancer in experimental animals. California requires warning labels for products containing significant amounts of this compound, yet many consumers have no idea that it may also be present in certain beers. Independent laboratory testing has also detected glyphosate residue in Heineken. Among several imported beers that have been tested, Heineken ranked relatively high for herbicide contamination. Although the measured levels remain within existing regulatory standards, many consumers question whether repeated exposure over decades is something they should simply accept. The famous green bottle creates another challenge that many beer drinkers never consider. Unlike darker glass, green bottles allow more ultraviolet light to reach the beer. This light exposure accelerates photodegradation, causing hops to break down and creating the unpleasant skunky aroma that beer enthusiasts immediately recognize. To compensate for this packaging weakness, manufacturers often rely on additional stabilizers and preservatives that help protect flavor during transportation and extended storage. One preservative associated with this process is potassium metabisulfite. While effective at preserving freshness, sulfites are known to trigger allergic reactions or breathing difficulties in some sensitive individuals. Despite this, many consumers remain unaware because warning labels are generally not required on beer packaging. Heineken also relies on hop extract oils instead of depending entirely on whole hops. While hop extracts provide remarkable consistency across millions of bottles, they cannot fully replace the naturally occurring antioxidants, aromatic oils, and anti-inflammatory plant compounds found in whole hop flowers. Traditional brewers argue that these natural components contribute significantly to both flavor complexity and used during clarification is isinglass, a gelatin-like substance derived from fish bladder. It helps remove suspended particles and leaves the finished beer crystal clear before packaging. Although only trace amounts remain after processing, consumers following vegetarian or vegan diets, as well as those with fish allergies, often have no idea that fish-derived ingredients may have been used because manufacturers are not required to disclose every processing aid. Each bottle contains approximately 142 calories and around 11 grams of carbohydrates. Critics argue that a portion of these carbohydrates results from the use of processed brewing adjuncts rather than relying exclusively on traditional malted barley. When all of these factors are considered together, genetically modified ingredients, herbicide residue, caramel coloring, preservatives, hop extracts, fish-derived clarification agents, and increased acetaldehyde production, Heineken begins to look very different from the premium image presented in its advertising. For a beer that has built its reputation on international quality and centuries of brewing tradition, many consumers may be surprised to discover just how many industrial shortcuts are involved in producing every bottle. Number 1. Pabst Blue Ribbon. Taking the number 1 spot on our list, Pabst Blue Ribbon combines nearly every concern we have discussed so far into a single beer. Known simply as PBR by many loyal fans, this American classic has experienced a major comeback in recent years, especially among younger drinkers who see it as authentic, affordable, and nostalgic. But behind that growing popularity lies an ingredient profile that has drawn serious criticism from researchers and beer experts alike. According to independent laboratory testing, Pabst Blue Ribbon contains some of the highest levels of genetically modified corn and corn syrup found among major American beer brands. In fact, corn accounts for well over half of the fermentable ingredients used during brewing, replacing much of the traditional malted barley that has formed the foundation of beer for centuries. Using large amounts of corn dramatically reduces production costs, while allowing the brewery to produce enormous volumes of beer at very low prices. However, many brewing experts argue that this approach sacrifices both flavor and ingredient quality in favor of maximum profit. Instead of relying primarily on whole hops, Pabst Blue Ribbon also uses hop extract pellets to create bitterness and maintain consistency. While this allows every batch to taste nearly identical, it removes many of the natural oils, antioxidants, and beneficial plant compounds found in traditional whole hop brewing. Perhaps the most concerning finding comes from laboratory testing conducted in 2024. Among all of the major American beer brands tested, Pabst Blue Ribbon recorded the highest levels of glyphosate contamination. Researchers detected herbicide residue at concentrations that have raised continuing concern among toxicologists studying long-term cumulative pesticide exposure through food and beverages. The brewing process also relies on multiple synthetic stabilizers, including propylene glycol alginate, kelkaloid, and modified food starch. These additives work together to improve foam stability, body appearance, and shelf life. While each ingredient is individually approved for use, critics argue that they represent another example of chemistry replacing traditional also contains caramel coloring that can produce 4-methylamidazole during manufacturing. This same compound has attracted scientific attention because laboratory studies linked high exposure levels to cancer in experimental animals. California requires warning labels for products containing significant amounts of this chemical, yet most beer drinkers remain completely unaware that it may also be present in certain beers. Each can contains approximately 144 calories and about 12.8 grams of carbohydrates. Most of those calories come from alcohol together with corn-derived sugars, offering little nutritional value while relying heavily on inexpensive processed ingredients. The extremely low retail price of Pabst Blue Ribbon reflects this production philosophy. Rather than investing in premium ingredients or traditional brewing techniques, the company focuses on keeping manufacturing costs as low as possible while producing millions of cans every year. What makes this situation especially concerning is the brand's recent resurgence in popularity. Many younger consumers choose Pabst Blue Ribbon because they believe it represents authenticity and old-fashioned American brewing. Ironically, according to critics, they may actually be drinking one of the most heavily processed beers available on store shelves. When you combine extremely high levels of genetically modified ingredients, the highest reported glyphosate contamination among major American beers, multiple synthetic stabilizers, caramel coloring, processed hop extracts, and aggressive cost-cutting throughout the brewing process, it becomes easier to understand why Pabst Blue Ribbon ranks at the very top of this list. For many beer experts, it represents everything they believe has gone wrong with large-scale industrial brewing. Instead of quality ingredients, patience, and craftsmanship, the emphasis has shifted toward maximum efficiency, minimum cost, and mass production. That is why Pabst Blue Ribbon earns our #1 position as the beer that raises the greatest number of ingredient concerns on this countdown. Now that we have exposed the 8 beer brands that deserve the most scrutiny, let us turn to some good news. Not every brewery has chosen the industrial path. There are still companies that believe great beer begins with simple ingredients, traditional brewing methods, and complete respect for the craft. Coming up next are 4 beer brands that many brewing experts trust because they prove that beer can still be brewed the way it was originally intended. Now that we have finished exposing the 8 beer brands that raise the biggest concerns, let us turn our attention to something much more encouraging. The good news is that not every brewery has sacrificed quality in the pursuit of mass production and lower costs. There are still breweries that remain committed to traditional brewing methods, simple ingredient lists, and complete transparency. They prove that great beer does not need genetically modified grains, synthetic stabilizers, or a long list of unnecessary processing aids to deliver outstanding flavor. If you appreciate beer that is brewed with real ingredients and genuine craftsmanship, these next 4 brands deserve your attention. Number 4. Samuel Smith Organic Ale. Opening our list of recommended beers is Samuel Smith Organic Ale, produced by the historic Samuel Smith Brewery in Yorkshire, England. Established in 1758, the brewery continues to follow many of the same traditional brewing practices that made it famous more than 2 centuries ago. Rather than modernizing every step for maximum efficiency, Samuel Smith has deliberately preserved methods that place craftsmanship ahead of speed and profit. One of the biggest reasons this beer stands apart is its remarkably simple. It contains only 4 ingredients: organic malted barley, organic hops, pure water, and yeast. Nothing more. There are no genetically modified grains, no synthetic stabilizers, no preservatives, no artificial coloring, and no unnecessary processing aids added to the finished beer. The brewery is certified organic by the Soil Association, one of the most respected organic certification organizations in the United Kingdom. That certification requires strict standards throughout the entire production process, ensuring that pesticides, herbicides, and genetically modified ingredients are excluded from every stage of brewing. Unlike many industrial breweries, Samuel Smith continues fermenting its beer inside traditional Yorkshire stone squares. This historic brewing method requires significantly more labor, more time, and greater attention from experienced brewers. Modern manufacturers abandoned this process decades ago because it is expensive and inefficient compared with stainless steel fermentation systems. However, supporters argue that the slower traditional approach allows the beer to develop deeper flavors naturally instead of depending on artificial adjustments later in production. Another important difference is the use of whole cone organic hops rather than concentrated hop extracts. Whole hops naturally contain aromatic oils, antioxidants, and plant compounds that contribute both flavor and complexity. Many brewing experts believe these characteristics cannot be fully reproduced by processed hop extracts used in large commercial breweries. Patience also plays a major role. Instead of rushing beer through production, Samuel Smith allows every batch to mature naturally for several weeks. During this conditioning period, the beer gradually develops balance, depth, and character without relying on stabilizers, flavor enhancers, or other chemical interventions. Each bottle contains approximately 5% alcohol and around 150 calories. Those calories come entirely from traditional brewing ingredients rather than inexpensive corn syrups or heavily processed adjuncts designed to lower manufacturing costs. Perhaps most importantly, Samuel Smith demonstrates that excellent beer can still be made without compromising the brewing principles that have existed for generations. There are no synthetic stabilizers, no preservatives, no genetically modified corn, no fish-derived clarification agents, no artificial additives, just carefully selected ingredients combined with centuries of brewing knowledge. Many master brewers consider Samuel Smith one of the closest examples of what traditional beer tasted like before industrial brewing transformed much of the modern beer industry. Because of its organic certification, independent inspections regularly verify ingredient integrity and production standards. Unlike many large commercial brands that disclose very little about what goes into their beer, Samuel Smith embraces transparency and allows its brewing philosophy to speak for itself. For anyone looking for a beer that respects tradition, values ingredient quality, and avoids many of the concerns discussed earlier in this video, Samuel Smith Organic Ale is an excellent place to begin. Number 3. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Coming in at number 3 is Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, a beer that many enthusiasts credit with helping launch the American craft beer movement. Since the brewery first opened its doors in 1980, Sierra Nevada has earned a reputation for refusing to compromise on ingredient quality, even as it grew into one of the largest craft breweries in the United States. Unlike many mass-produced beers, Sierra Nevada keeps its ingredient list using only malted barley, hops, pure water, and yeast. There are no genetically modified corn syrups, no artificial stabilizers, no synthetic preservatives, and no unnecessary additives designed to cut costs or speed up production. What truly separates Sierra Nevada from many commercial breweries is its commitment to sourcing. The company owns and operates its own hop farm, allowing it to maintain strict control over growing conditions and harvesting practices. By producing much of its own hops, Sierra Nevada can better ensure cleaner ingredients while preserving the natural oils, aromas, antioxidants, and beneficial plant compounds that whole hops provide. Unlike industrial breweries that often rely on concentrated hop extracts for consistency, Sierra Nevada continues using 100% whole cone hops. Brewing experts widely regard whole cone hops as the gold standard because they produce deeper flavor, richer aroma, and greater complexity, while preserving the characteristics that processed extracts often lose. The barley used for brewing is sourced from carefully selected farming partners who follow strict agricultural standards. The brewery routinely tests ingredients for contaminants and works closely with suppliers to minimize pesticide exposure whenever possible. Sierra Nevada has also invested heavily in environmental sustainability. The brewery operates one of the largest privately owned solar power systems in the American brewing industry. It also uses advanced water reclamation systems and energy-efficient brewing equipment to reduce its environmental footprint. These investments reflect a broader commitment to quality that extends well beyond the brewing process itself. Another important difference is the way Sierra Nevada approaches fermentation. Instead of relying on enzymes, chemical accelerators, or industrial shortcuts, each batch undergoes traditional fermentation and conditioning that may take several weeks. This slower process allows flavors to develop naturally through time, rather than through artificial intervention. The result is a beer with remarkable balance, depth, and consistency, without depending on synthetic additives. Each bottle contains approximately 5.6% alcohol and around 175 calories. Those calories come from real brewing ingredients rather than inexpensive processed sugars added to reduce manufacturing costs. One reason Sierra Nevada continues earning respect among both consumers and brewing professionals is its commitment to transparency. The company openly shares information about its water sources, hop varieties, barley suppliers, and brewing practices. This level of openness remains uncommon among many of the largest commercial beer producers, who often disclose only limited information about their production methods. Independent laboratory testing has also consistently reported extremely low or undetectable levels of glyphosate residue in Sierra Nevada products. Researchers have likewise found no evidence of the synthetic stabilizers and processing additives commonly associated with many industrial beers. Some nutrition experts also point out that traditionally brewed craft beers like Sierra Nevada, when enjoyed responsibly and in moderation, naturally contain antioxidants and plant compounds derived from hops that may offer modest cardiovascular benefits. While no beer should ever be considered a health food, ingredient quality still matters. More than 4 decades after helping reshape American brewing, Sierra Nevada continues proving that commercial success does not require sacrificing traditional brewing principles. For beer drinkers looking for honest ingredients, careful craftsmanship, and complete transparency, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale remains one of the strongest choices available today. Number 2 is Allagash White, brewed by Allagash Brewing Company in Portland, Maine. Since the brewery was founded in 1995, it has earned widespread recognition for producing authentic Belgian-style wheat beers while maintaining exceptionally high ingredient standards. Rather than chasing mass production or cutting costs, Allagash has focused on preserving traditional brewing methods and carefully selecting every ingredient that goes into each bottle. The recipe itself reflects that philosophy. Allagash White is brewed using malted barley, raw wheat, oats, hops, coriander, and dried curacao orange peel. Every ingredient serves a purpose, and every one of them is natural. There are no genetically modified grains, no synthetic preservatives, no artificial coloring, and no unnecessary chemical stabilizers added to the brewing process.